Okay, so I'm going to be Don for a few minutes because he seems to have stepped out for a moment. When he returns, he'll take my place. I'm going to start by just asking each of you to give us a very quick overview of the work that you're doing, tell us your name and the work that you're doing, and then we'll jump right into questions.
Hi. I'm just trying to stay in this chair without getting thrown out, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah, we were a little worried because they have wheels.
There's no seatbelt. I want you to know I'm flying without a seatbelt.
Here you go, Don.
I'm John Bowcut. I'm with the city of Spanish Fork in Spanish Fork, Utah, obviously. And we got in the broadband business in the year 2000, basically. So we built a hybrid fiber coax system in the year 2000 and have been operating that successfully, profitably, putting money back into the general fund for since about year 4. We broke even in year 4. So it's been a very successful operation for the city of Spanish Fork. And we are currently working on our fiber to the home changeover, and we are just about three quarters of a year through our first year in a 4-year project.
So good morning, I'm Beth Huning, and I am from the beautiful city of Mesa, Arizona, that you're all enjoying today, I hope. I hear it's supposed to hit 100 degrees this week, so for all of those that are visiting. I'm the city engineer for the city of Mesa. In Mesa, we have a very unique community in that the west side of our community is older, it's more established, more mature, and the development, the eastern and southeastern part is developing rapidly. I heard the mayor say in a meeting this week that we issued more building permits than the city of Phoenix this last month. So we're growing very rapidly in our southeast portion of the city. We have a wide variety of broadband providers, some more traditional like CenturyLink and Cox, and then we have a series of dark fiber providers such as Zayo and Level 3 working in our community. Over the last few years, I think we have over 14 utilities in our right-of-way today. Gets a little congested, it gets a little competitive for space. So we were looking at ways we could do things without trying to interrupt our right-of-way, without creating inconvenience, and still get things in the ground that potential industries or homeowners might need. Used to be in the old days when I started as a city engineer, you'd go into a meeting with economic development and a new business, and they'd ask about water, sewer, power, and how do I get to and from my site, so traffic. Nowadays, they come in and they talk about data, water, sewer, power, and how do I get to my site. So our agendas are a little different, and it's pretty critical that we get data in the ground for the people who want to develop their businesses here in Mesa. So we work pretty hard to make sure that we get those facilities in the ground. One of the things we've been working on over the past couple of years, my staff is, I think, sitting over at that table, have been developing a program. About 15 years ago, in the boom period, we were able to start installing a bank of 12 2-inch conduits in parts of our city. And in those days, we thought we would need 12 conduits for our service. Nowadays, with current equipment, the light drivers that are available and the fiber that's out there, we find we don't need all those conduits. So we're in the process of entering into a program where we can work with public-private partnerships to lease or, say, rent those conduits. My attorney were here, she'd make me say the word license. Which you guys are probably all pretty familiar with. And then also what we find in the western part of our city in the older and more mature areas, we have older pipes that we've abandoned in place. So we've been working with some of our private companies in the potential to repurpose some of those, develop that program. We have a couple of agreements in place. Zayo is providing service for dark fiber to the Apple facility out at Single Butte and Elliott. They worked with us on a pretty unique public-private license agreement to use some of our conduit. And we have another agreement in place with Cox, and we're talking to a couple others now. So that's what we're doing.
Wow, I thought she was the politician. No, I'm Bob Fifer. I'm the mayor pro tem of the city of Arvada, Colorado. My professional background is about 23 years in telecom and IT work, disaster recovery kind of work, and I'm also part of the National League of Cities Information Technology and Communications Committee, as well as I serve on the FCC's Intergovernmental Advisory Committee, and I kind of travel around talking about things that we're doing in our community to expand broadband. And we have challenges. Industry doesn't always agree with what we would like to do. So hopefully we'll share a little bit with you all today in regards to our efforts.
Good morning. My name is Kimball Sekaquaptewa. I come from New Mexico. I'm with Amerind Critical Infrastructure, which is a new division created by an Indian-owned insurance company. That the insurance company itself was formed in the 80s when private insurance companies were very hesitant to insure tribal properties and governments, and so or it was just so prohibitively expensive that the tribes couldn't afford it, so they came together to form a risk pool. So now fast forward into today, and serving those critical needs and serving our communities includes the broadband infrastructure. So it was a new division that was created just within the last year. But before that, I came from the Santa Fe Indian School, where I worked in the education space for about 16 years. The Santa Fe Indian School is owned and operated by 19 pueblos in the state of New Mexico. And I came from an IT background, so I was just the IT coordinator, and E-rate was something I did in the back of the IT trailer in the dark when everybody went home. I never knew that it would transform to what it has. And in the last couple of years, I've worked beyond our campus trying to help tribal libraries connect using the E-rate program, especially when the special fiber rules came into place. So we've built a consortium, and we're implementing a 60-mile fiber network coming out of Albuquerque, which I can share a little bit later. So our approach is just to develop and bring broadband to the tribal community as a whole by leveraging the schools and libraries.
Yeah, my name is David Littell. I'm with the County of Riverside in California, a county that's just about the size of New Jersey, so it's a big area. Has anyone heard of the Coachella Music Festival? That's in my county. It's big, and Lady Gaga's there, and there's a lot of money and everything. Well, Coachella also is sort of well known in my county for the fact that you have a very large population there whose children have no access to the internet. They go to the local bus yard because they have Wi-Fi there, and they take their smartphones and try to do their homework at a bus yard. So what we're doing right now is RIVCOconnect project is we're trying to bring in carriers to build out fiber to the home and try to get rid of this kind of thing. So to Commissioner Clyburn's comments earlier, building out fiber is one thing, and getting gigabit speed internet is one thing, especially when you talk about Indian Wells or Corona or some of the other wealthier cities in our county. But you also have to have build-outs in Coachella and Desert Hot Springs and those other underserved areas as well. So that's what we're doing right now.
My name's Don Williams. I'm the tardy moderator. My apologies. I work for NTIA, which is part of the Department of Commerce in Washington, and I've been working there about 7.5 years. Before that, I was a consultant for cities and county and state governments around the country on telecom. And as Debbie spoke earlier, tomorrow we're going to have a NTIA 4-hour or so technical assistance workshop, which I hope many of you are already signed up for, and it should be quite a bit of fun. As you can tell, we've got a great panel here today. Bunch of exciting folks doing exciting things, and everybody's doing something pretty different in each one of the communities. And both as a consultant and then working with NTIA, I go to places from different as Baltimore and Chicago to places that are really quite rural. I was just working in Shawnee, Kansas last week. I'll be going out again to the islands of Maine. And what I've noticed over time is that broadband's universal, everybody wants it. How you get there and what works for a community is completely local as far as I can tell. And that's a wonderful thing. It also makes for a lot of good stories. And I think we're going to have a lot of good stories here today. Mayor, I know that the city has thought an awful lot about bringing broadband to the community and putting it on the agenda. And I've looked on your website and read some things. You do a lot of e-government services. And I'm wondering if you could tell us how broadband has enabled you to do e-government services such as ticketing and asset inventories. And if you could address that, that'd be great.
And I think a lot of communities are actually doing some form of it or another, but I can give an example of productivity within our city. Being a technologist sitting on council, it's kind of good for the techie folks in the room that we always try to fund all the new toys, because I always believe that we should work smarter, not harder. And one is our utilities department. Obviously, I think we all have a water sewer line in our cities, but our folks, when a water line would go below, which we all don't want to happen, but if it does, we would run out, see where it's at, kind of get an idea, and the guy that visually remembered it or took a picture runs back to the office, picks up the plans, come back out and find out that it was built, 60 years ago. What we've done is we've now tried to leverage technology by actually putting hotspots in all of our city vehicles as much as we can, as we bring new ones in, and then we move them to pads, and then we took the time and energy and money to move everything digital, so that when our utilities department shows up, we're not wasting water, we're focusing on it right then and there and taking care of it. We're also, when you talk about ticketing, well, there's all sorts of ticketing. I mean, police ticketing, or the ticketing that when you come into our website. But we do leverage a system where citizens can just put in a simple question or just answer a few questions, and we will submit tickets throughout the city, and the city is measured. We follow a performance measurement system, and we kind of run it like a business in a way. We look for outcomes to our strategic goals, and we use tickets to know, are we performing at the level that we expect, our citizens expect of us. So we try to do things within a couple hours, if not the same day, and then make sure we provide that service. And then obviously going to the bad tickets that we get with our police officers, that hand out, we're making them all hotspots now, and they're all linked back with a little handheld and video streaming back to our headquarters and so forth when they're writing the ticket on the device, and they have full access to the internet with their high speed today. So this is a good way to get access fairly quickly. You can use small devices. You don't have to carry around bulky computers anymore. Even now in our new police cars, we have it's all built into the dashboard. It's all touchscreen now. So there's no laptop there for safety reasons. It's fully accessible in the front. So those are the kind of things we're trying to do to, again, work smarter, not harder.
Indeed, those are some of the fundamentals of a very popular term at the moment is smart cities. And that's exactly how to do it. Thank you. Beth, thank you for being here with us in Mesa, and thanks for having us.
Thank you.
One of the things I noticed about Mesa is it's much larger than most people are thinking.
Oh, it is.
And you mentioned this growth spurts, and I guess you're over 450,000 people now. And one of the things that I was looking at, you guys have conduit everywhere. You've got infrastructure for gas, electric, water, sewer. And I'm wondering if you could just give us some of the background on this East Streets program that the city has going.
Yes, we do. Actually, Mesa's, I think, the 38th largest city in the nation, and we're still growing. But we also cover a lot of land. So I think within the municipal incorporated areas, we're on the order of about 130 square miles, but our larger planning area for our utilities, such as water and sewer, is more in the order of 150 square miles. So we have to cover a lot of distance here in the desert. And it's interesting because, urban planning is going more towards dense, vertical, smaller right-of-ways. So if you go out into Southeast Mesa, you'll see that out in the Eastmark development, DMB's new development out there, they're going in on much smaller sites, closer to the streets and smaller right-of-ways. So that creates additional interesting scenarios for us. But here in Mesa, like I mentioned a while ago, we put in a series of conduits runs many years ago. They did not get looped in a complete loop. So when we started looking at the assets we had, the assets we would need for city services, we discovered we had quite a few assets in the ground that we didn't need specifically for city services. We looked at ways to leverage those to not only keep our right-of-ways intact with a lot less restrictions to the traveling public, but also to make it quicker and easier for people to come in that had economic development interests in our community. Out in Southeast Mesa with the Elliott Tech Corridor, we're working to bring in, where Apple's currently located, and we're working to bring in other tech companies. We looked at that loop, and it's right there. It just wasn't completed. So we leveraged that with some of our public-private firms. Our dark fiber companies like Zayo is one of our larger agreements. They came in and they've licensed to use part of the conduit to provide the service. And as part of that, they're actually completing the loop for us and providing in-kind services. So we structured a deal with them where they get a 20-year lease. They're providing assets for us and completing our loops, and they also gave us an upfront payment to use our conduit. So it worked out really well. They got up, and one of the conditions from Apple was they'd be up and running very quickly, just a matter of a few months. And so they were able to meet all their deadlines. We were able to keep our right-of-way intact and get some infrastructure and to complete our loops. So it worked out really well for us.
Now, that's great. I mean, the Apple Global Command Center, I
Yes,
think it's
that's what it's called.
Wow.
Nice name.
And the other thing, too, is, I mean, it's one of the more popular items, and that's going to be particularly true over the next several years in Washington, I think, is public-private partnerships and the expansion of broadband using public-private partnerships in its many and varied forms. And Mesa's a great example of doing that at the moment. John, you're a provider.
I am.
And Spanish Forks is in central Utah, and it's an electric city, so you own your own electric grid. And you've been working on providing triple play services. And I know some communities that are building broadband are just working on an internet, and others are doing triple play, which is phone and cable TV as well as the internet. Tell us about how Spanish Forks started doing this and how long it's taken you, and then later on I want to get into your rebuild plans as well.
Have you got a few hours?
I do.
Yeah, we started it because there was no high-speed internet in our town at the turn of the century. And the incumbent provider, who was AT&T, would they would tell us they were going to bring high-speed internet in, and then they would change their plans. And the last time they did that, we just got fed up, and we brought a bunch of our community leaders together and said, should we do something? What can we do? And then we built what we could afford, which was not fiber to the home. We looked seriously at a fiber to the home at that point, but we just could not afford it. The bonds would have been so high, it was 3 times, probably more than 3 times, to do a fiber to the home build. So we built a hybrid fiber coax with about 150 homes per node, and when we just go coax the rest of the way. But we built it for about $8 million instead of $25 million. So just a little common sense, build what you can afford. Fast forward 4 years, we broke even, and we were able to make our bond payments and pay all of our employees. There was no drag on the general fund or anything like that. We were totally self-sufficient. And then after that, we just started putting money back into the general fund. So we've been very, very successful. For us, we're an electric city. We have electric services, water services, of course, and this is just one more utility that we offer for our community. And we built almost all of it ourselves. We went out to bid. I'll tell you an interesting story. As I was looking to build this, we knew we had to get the money quickly because the Utah legislature was going to actually pass laws that were going to prevent cities from getting in the business. And the city manager is a brilliant man. He's retired since, but brilliant man, and he realized that was going to happen. I had no idea. I was a network engineer. What did I know, right? This is politics. And he came and said, we got to have the money now. We've got to spend the money now because they're going to stop us from getting the money if we don't spend it. This was fall, and of course, after January, you have the new session. And I said, I haven't done the work yet. It's not all done. And he said, give me a number. So I gave him a number. So we did that. And then I went out to bid for the underground portion of our town. It was about half and half in those days. Half overhead. And overhead is cheap and easy, right? We own the poles. So for the people who have pole attachment problems, that wasn't a problem for us. But the underground bids came back for the cheapest bid was $7 million just for the underground portion. And I only had 8. I had to build a head end and everything else. So we hired our own crews, we bought our own boring machines, and we did it ourselves. And we did it for a fraction of the cost that the contractors would have charged us. So you got to think outside the box. We initially only had 2 services. We had cable television and high-speed internet, but that was just as IP telephony was starting to take over. And so I didn't really want to spend $1 million on an old style switch, right? And so we elected not to do that and let that market mature, the VoIP market mature. And we then got into that market about 6 years ago. And the cable television business was actually quite big. Initially, it has been going down and down. So we're actually, we sloughed customers. We got to about 55% of the town took our cable television service. The rest of the town was either taking antennas or Comcast. We compete directly against Comcast and or Dish or DirecTV. We have about 75% penetration on our internet, however. Yeah, so the internet is a real good value. We want to make sure that that's there for our residents. And the phone service is about 25%, so it's not huge, and we know that that's also a product that isn't. Interestingly enough, it's not going down. It's just holding at 25%. So they've all been successful, but internet is, well, the cash cow. That's how you pay for this infrastructure, is you pay for it with internet.
Well, if you're in charge of a network, it's always good to have at least 1 or 2 cash cows. And that's a great example of, 99.9% of all the municipal systems are incredibly successful. Each in their own way sometimes, but nonetheless providing valued utility services to their community. Kimball, I'm really interested to know how an E-rate application evolved into a 60-mile fiber network. That's a story. So,
Well, being up here, I'm feeling amongst my panelists here and the people I met that I'm feeling like it's a little engine that could. I feel like I'm at the beginning of something that there's a lot of years of experience in here. It started just by trying to ask for internet and not being able to get any. Because of my years at the Indian school and then reaching out. So at the Indian school, we worked really hard to have a robust network. We've been doing E-rate since year 1. We have a 10 gig backbone. We have a gig to the computer. We have fiber connecting our buildings. We're in a good spot, and we finally got fiber-based internet connection going out to the world. So we said, what do we want to do? We're a tribally controlled school. We want culturally relevant programming. We want to develop it. We want to work with our communities. And then when we reached out to the communities, nobody could talk back to us. We thought video conferencing would be really good, especially with the language classes. So they literally, like the Cochiti tribal government and the public library were operating off of 1T1. And you couldn't even call CenturyLink for more copper. That was it. So that was my starting point. And so our administration was like, Kimball, just go help them. So I did. I peddled my services up and down the Middle Rio Grande, and most people who knew E-rate, and the libraries especially, wanted nothing to do with it. So I had 2 libraries that would try, and that was Cochiti and San Felipe, and at that point, you couldn't do special fiber construction. So what we did is we asked for, Verizon came in, and I asked for 2 data plans and a cradle point router. We kind of trunked it onto that device, and I had to defend it with my life getting through E-rate that year. But because it literally was the only choice that they had, I was successful. And then E-rate changed the rules, allowing for special fiber construction, which I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with, and it allowed for dark fiber, self-provision networks. They had to beat the comparable or available at least service. But what they also allowed for, which was extremely important, was for extra capacity. So while it wouldn't be discounted like the schools and libraries portion, you could put in and pay for extra conduit or upgrade your equipment, and then you could use it beyond the school and library needs, which previous to that, you didn't do anything that wasn't for the schools and libraries for E-rate, and you never break an E-rate rule. The first rule of E-rate, or you go to E-rate jail, which I think is federal prison for me. So we got, yeah, everybody knows that. So so the 2 libraries that threw their name in the hat, they're like, let's just try it. And I'm like, okay, let's go for it. So we developed an RFP. And I worked, New Mexico had a really aggressive state broadband effort. The governor put in a lot of money for a match. And also when they rolled out the special E-rate rules, if you could get a state or federal match to help with your discount or your match portion. For us, we're 90%, the highest discount level. So we had 10%. But if we could find a state, federal, or tribal source to kick in 5, then E-rate would kick in another 5. So we were looking at what would be 95% off of our project costs. And so I worked with the state informally as like the ad hoc, like tribal member. So they had some tribal representation. And that turned out to be really powerful because in all my years working in Indian education in the Bureau of Indian Education Network, we didn't have any partnerships or positive project outcomes with state entities, the state public education department, or working with state IT. You know, we were just in different camps. But because Broadband, you know, we had to work together to, you know, we're in a community and maybe there's a non-tribal entity next to us, we needed to connect everybody along the way. So it forced these unique partnerships and that effort, and they really supported me through that RFP process. So as far as the process went, I put out the RFP for those 2 tiny communities, and our partners were like, nobody's gonna come. You have to call every service provider you can think of and ask them to be there for you. Well, we had the opposite response. We had everybody there. They were all very interested. And I'm not sure if it was because of tribal rights of way or because we were so tiny and so far out that they just lost interest, or because E-rate had a 28-day return on the RFP and their internal processes slowed them down where they couldn't actually create a proposal. But all the telcos kind of fell to the side. And what I did in the RFP is I said I just didn't want a lot of internet, fast, cheap internet. I wanted to connect to the Albuquerque 505 Marquette, which is a carrier hotel in our area. And that was going to be the 2 in our network design. So what emerged was a local construction company called Kelly Cable in New Mexico put together a holistic package for us, like a turnkey plan, where we had 30 miles of self-provisioned fiber going to the outskirts of Albuquerque. And then we switched over to a 20-year dark fiber IRU with Zayo that went into the carrier hotel. And we're in the University of New Mexico suite there. It's called the Gigapop. And although we haven't realized its potential, we wanted it there because, for one, we were getting cheap internet. They offered us $3, which I know lots of people in the room can beat, but for us that was outstanding compared to the 1.5 megs that Cochiti had for $3.50 a month. And then it's a 10 gig wave going up for that E-rate portion. So that was the initial design that we bid on for E-rate, and we went through a very thorough review, and I answered a lot of questions, and I can't tell you how many hundreds of hours I've spent on it. But we were approved, and what we did for extra capacity was the schools and libraries, E-rate will only pay like that small 12 strands, 1 conduit, just to get 100 megs probably to each site. Ours was over that 10 gig wave. But the tribes themselves now have stepped up, and we have designed it. We put the equipment on steroids. We're trying to afford up to 144 strand and extra conduit in the ground. And then we're trying to design it in a way where they each have their 10 gig wave, where they'll have their independent and self-controlled networks.
That's a great story. Thank you. David, you're about 60 miles outside of Los Angeles, and you've got a broadband plan that involves the private sector as well as your own fiber and wireless. Can you tell us a little bit about what the general approach is?
Sure, yeah. Riverside County, again, it's a large county. We run from about 20 miles from the ocean all the way to the Colorado River. So we have 28 cities, we have 12 tribal communities, we have about 43 unincorporated communities.
That's a lot of stakeholders.
It's a lot of stakeholders. And so one of the things that we're looking at is the county has fiber, obviously. We have fiber ring. We connect our county facilities. It does nothing for the residents. The residents right now are served by a little section up in the northwestern portion of the county by AT&T. Down the southwest and a little bit in the desert, we have Frontier with some Fios, so we do have a little bit of fiber to the home. And then the rest of it is all Spectrum business. Used to be Time Warner and Charter. So they have the largest footprint, but there are just a lot of pockets where they're really underserved, and I think our highest speed is like 100 megabits. I believe maybe 300 in some pockets, but not too much. So the beginning of this really was our CIO, Steve Reneker, used to be with the city of Los Angeles, and while in Los Angeles, they came up with this project called CityLink LA, and initially they put out an RFI, and they said, we need to build out fiber within the city. So the RFI, the request for information really was, what's preventing you guys from coming in and building this out? And it seems like a lucrative business. I mean, why aren't you doing it? And they came back and said, and large carriers and small carriers alike said, basically it's you guys. It's 30% of our costs are involved in red tape, in permits, in trying rights of way, in trying to get on the poles, trying to find plots of land to drop our fiber huts. It's you guys. You guys are kind of standing in our way. And so the city of LA then set out on their project for CityLink LA. Well, Steve came back to the county of Riverside and became our CIO again. He had been there in the 90s. And they had a department head retreat with our county executive officer, Jay Orr. He convened this retreat for economic development purposes to figure out, like, what do we have to do to take the next step as a county? And so one of the big things is broadband. It's underserved areas, sure, but it's also just the lack of real connectivity, of big enough pipes and enough speed to bring in more high-tech businesses maybe. Right now we're kind of a logistics county. We have a lot of warehouses and a lot of trucks. We don't have a lot of high-tech. Well, there are high-tech companies wanting to come into areas like Riverside County and other areas too, which provided they have that sort of connectivity and that kind of infrastructure. So we're a little bit too big. Like I say, 28 cities and everything. We can't do what Spanish Fork did, but what we want to do is we want to get that 30% of the cost these builders are looking at, these carriers are looking at, and reduce it. And so we're expediting permitting processes. We're looking to try to take care of CEQA exemption, not exemption, but CEQA issues. And CEQA is California Environmental Quality Act. And so it can add years to a build. And so we have areas that have already passed CEQA, so that won't be an issue if we can provide some public plots of land to drop fiber huts in. We're partnering right now with Southern California Edison, which has fiber all over the place and has a whole lot of light poles and a whole lot of power poles. And so they are partnering with us, and they're going to be offering a lot of pole attachments at a reasonable rate. So we're looking at trying to sort of pave the way and knock that 30% down so that a carrier is going to look at this and say, you know what, we can partner with a Zayo or a larger company and maybe a smaller provider and come in and actually start building out fiber to all the premises.
And you just recently released a very interesting RFP, which I had the opportunity to look at last week when I was in Kansas. And want to talk a little bit about that, because that seems to put forward a lot of the ideas that you were just mentioning in a more rigorous fashion.
Yeah, and an RFP in this case, for most people, an RFP is request for proposals. This is a request for participants. And so the county's not putting money up. The cities aren't putting money up. What we did was we started meeting with the cities and the tribal communities, and we said, this is what we want to do. Are you with us? And all the cities now have signed on. We have some of the tribal communities have signed on, and they signed resolutions saying, yeah, we're in this. We want to do this. And so what we're doing, we're asking for basically participants to come in and say, we now see that there's not only a supportive county government, we also have 28 supportive city governments, and we have some tribal governments that are supporting this, along with Southern California Edison and Riverside Public Utilities and some other local entities that are going to help smooth this out and bring them in. So we just put this out 2 weeks ago. So far, we're getting quite a few responses, and we're going to be having our bidders meeting, I believe, this Thursday. So going to kind of get an idea about how many people are going to be responding to it. But so far, the response has been very good.
Oh, that's great. That's great. John, I've got a question on your. So a lot of your cable companies that are serving you at the moment, they're also on basically a hybrid fiber coax system, and most of them got up to 850 megs or whatever megahertz. But you've gotten a different approach. So you've got your hybrid fiber coax providing cable television services, but you did something very different in terms of left that in the ground and put in fiber. You want to talk about how you did that and why you did that?
You bet.
Thanks.
In the process now, we have 80 nodes inside of our town, and we have done about 15 of those nodes have been converted over to fiber. And we are leaving the coax in the ground, and we are keeping the cable television service on the coax. We already had a video head end that worked with a hybrid fiber coax system. So we have a video head end for that. We'd have to convert it all to IP. And you're talking about a product that is really changing. I was having a good conversation with the gentleman from Utopia about how they're looking at video transport and the changes that market is really bringing for everybody. And we can see that coming down the pipe, right? We know if you're not in the cable television business, you may not understand these programmers, the contracts that they make us sign are just incredible, and the limitations they put on us. And we realize that eventually they don't even want us to be in the business. Disney would really like to just sell direct, let's be honest. They would rather just give you a bill, or it just gets put on your credit card every month, and you get Disney, ESPN, and ABC, and all of that comes on there. So we realize that product is really going down. There's a lot of cord cutters in our town, especially in the younger population. And so for us, why would we invest millions of dollars to upgrade our cable television? There is no ROI on this. I've done the math. You just can't do it. I can't go outside of my city limits either. That is one part of the state laws that were passed that limit me. And so I can't go outside of my city limits. So I can't even grow, to say, well, we can do an economy of scale and upgrade our cable television offering. So for us, it's just going down. And so we just don't want to invest in it. We'll just leave it on the coax plant. It also then means that my internet can be that much faster. I don't have to take up any of the bandwidth. And I can use it all. And as a network engineer, I don't want video on there. I really don't. I want it to be just internet. We'll let voice go just because there's so little data on voice. But
Beth, so for Mesa, I know you have a cost recovery program, and I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the cost recovery and how I know you have some private, you're getting some benefits from some of the providers that you give your conduit to, but in other cases, how are you working your cost recovery?
Well, we've established kind of a per foot cost, and that's the way we went out into the market. And we looked back at what it cost us to invest in the conduit originally and kind of did a capital recovery on it. But one of the things when we started working with some of the private firms that were looking at getting the Apple contract, because they bid that competitively. So we were working with multiple firms who were interested in leasing our conduit when Apple was going through their procurement, is that most of them want to look at it similar to how like an electric utility would look at it, where they put in a service line to them. They want to recover that in a certain period of time. So they want a fixed cost up front. With Zayo, we were able to structure the deal as a 20-year deal. They built us some infrastructure for an in-kind of about $1.65 million. And then they paid us upfront for the 20-year lease. So we also got a cash contribution as part of that lease deal. So we were able to structure it that way. When we typically start, we've got another smaller agreement with Cox right now, and that's on a per foot basis per year, annually charged, and we work it that way. It's a much smaller deal, though. It really depends on the provider, how they want to interact with us and how long a deal they want for the conduit.
You've got a lot of flexibility in how you can
Oh, we
interact
do.
with the providers. That's nice. That's nice.
We
Mayor, I got to ask you, I live in Washington, D.C., and every year they come out with a who's got the most horrible traffic. And usually it's a contest between Washington and Los Angeles, and oddly enough, sometimes we win, and that's not really great. you've got a lot of traffic control going on, and you want to talk about how broadband has enabled you to work on your traffic flows?
I think we're at the top now in Denver. I mean, we're getting up there with Dallas. But yeah, so, when we look at all this broadband and fiber in the ground, I sit as an executive officer to our COG or MPO, so Council of Governments or Metropolitan Organization. And as an executive there, one thing is you just can't widen roads. I mean, I have to say, but Texas does it all the time. I mean, you can have 20 lanes on each side. But for us in Colorado, we're very aware of our environment and don't want to necessarily widen roads. So we've been really discussing a lot of how do we leverage broadband and getting fiber in the cities to create smarter cities, right? And really what we're testing with Road X is what it's called in our state, in the Denver areas. We're testing, obviously, autonomous cars, which are important to us in some aspects, but we're also trying to get self-learning traffic lights. So they understand what's happening at what time of days and then coordinate with each other down the road. So, usually you go through and you do your test and you're like, well, at 3 to 5 o'clock or 3 to 6, you're going to do it this cycle. Well, now we want to start teaching our lights to flow with holidays and so forth. And so we're moving that direction right now. We're also trying to see how we can coordinate with broadband the bandwidth to track lights that are around on and off ramps of freeways, so that we make sure that what's coming on and off the freeways are coordinated that through the city and the traffic moves. So when we start looking at capacity is not necessarily widening the roads. It's really around operational capacity, around your traffic systems. And so we're really trying to focus on that issue. And in fact, I'm encouraging our COG as one of the executive officers that we're going to start giving out our TIP federal money around which technology is introduced into the capacity projects that are operational impacts. So now I'm trying to see if we can start looking at it this way versus, well, you're going to add another 15 lane miles. Well, that's not for tomorrow. Tomorrow's the end use. What are you going to use it for? As some of you may know, in our state, we've already tested an 18-wheeler rig autonomously from northern Denver all the way to the Wyoming border. It was illegal to be on our roads, but our state patrol took care of that. But the idea is what intelligence did we put into the streets, and how do we forward think about autonomous vehicles during a snowstorm? And how do we think about, they can't see the lines in a snowstorm, so the idea is maybe we'll put markers into the streets or pucks or other things that can scrape, but not scrape them off. And so how do we leverage technology in that fashion? So when we all talk about fiber going through our communities, that's great and dandy, but I want to look at how do we, again, work smarter, not harder, and focus in the 5 years. We believe autonomous vehicles will be all over our roads in less than 5 years. I think we're at 4 now in our eyes. So being one of the test areas of Road X and autonomous vehicles, that's why we want to leverage traffic. So if we can get those cars a little bit closer to each other, that's how we gain capacity, and with coordination with everything else around. So that's kind of our thoughts, and hopefully we'll see what happens here soon.
Well, I'd love to see some more coordination around the Washington Beltway. That would be incredibly useful. Kimball, can you tell us about what the impact? I know you did a great project in Santa Fe, and so what has been the impact at the moment here for this network and your E-rate service for tribal education?
Well, in general, we all know education is the key to upward mobility just for our communities and our members. So, but what E-rate's going to do for us, I think, in this situation is change Native education in this way. I mean, we all can talk about distance learning, and we all know all those benefits, but we all also know the statistics of Native American underperformance in education and higher education, college attainment, et cetera. And what E-rate can do, or what E-rate's going to do, is change the way that the mechanisms by which I think our children are educated. Because just upgrading some textbook or introducing something new in the schools isn't gonna change those dire statistics around. We need to change the way that education looks in our communities. So I think that in our project when we've engaged the tribal libraries, because right now the kids get off the bus, they don't have internet. The school day just kind of ends, and they go on to play, or if they want the computer, they go to the tribal libraries and get whatever internet they can get out of it. If we can have the high speed in the internet, we can continue the school day, and we can build stronger partnerships that go into what the library services are and eventually the home, and I think we can strengthen the educational effort all around. But furthermore, in our communities, we have language and culture programs, and they're not official, formal education, but there's a lot of education happening in the communities. So I think also by integrating the libraries into the tighter mission, I think we're going to strengthen those programs and increase our cultural preservation agenda. So we're excited about that. But technology can also, with engineering, or what we want to do is create, I have this vision for this kind of a Pueblo education network. So, just like a district, and we see the districts taking advantage of E-rate this way, is having, their hub back to their district offices and have the point-to-point connections between the schools. So I very much see a point-to-point connections between all of our Pueblos and our libraries to create this regional backbone for the education mission. But we also, we're going to be serving the whole community with broadband to create curriculum and create opportunities for our kids that are culturally specific and culturally relevant. And it's important that we create this communication pathway for us to talk to each other and to collaborate amongst ourselves as Pueblo communities, because we're small, but we have similar challenges, so we need to work together. And we have to find the solutions for ourselves to help our communities then dig deep. So I think that the technology that we're building and the network we're building will provide that opportunity for us.
Thank you.
Don, we found an interesting way to avoid the infamous E-rate jail. When we built our system, we went to the school district. It was kind of interesting. They had written new software to run all of their attendance and everything else. The district is actually based in our city, and they had T1s to all of their schools, and it wouldn't run across to T1. So they were just screaming. And so we went and ran fiber to every single school. But in those days, you couldn't offer dark fiber. You couldn't have infrastructure with the E-rate. And so we just said, well, we'll make it so cheap that you don't have to worry about E-rate. And that's what we did. So we don't do E-rate in our community anymore just because we just give it to them so cheap they don't need it. And works really well now because they actually run their own network. We give them room in our head end. They put their own switches. We don't sell them circuits or anything else. They get dark fiber. They can do whatever they want with to every school.
Are you the E-rate provider for the school system?
I was,
You were.
but I'm not now.
You're not.
Yeah.
Okay. Beth, wondering what's your next steps?
Well, for us, our next steps is we've been meeting with all of our private parties in the right-of-way. I think we want to get more of a presence out on the internet, get more information out, get our program a little more developed. We've got a couple of test cases now, and get it out there for people to know that we're using it. So I think we're kind of moving towards the marketing phase, so to speak, so that people know it's there, and that industries interested in locating in Mesa know it's available as well. So get more into the economic development side as well.
I think we're, according to the timekeeper, it's time for questions. So there's 2 microphones, and if folks could come up, I think there should be a lot of questions to pose to folks. Yeah.
So since we're being recorded, it's Matthew Rantanen, the Director of Technology for Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association. Thank you for the panel. I have a question for David. So I am working with some of the Southern California tribes, and I'm very interested in Riverside County's interest in, building out and helping build out, promoting fiber. So you had mentioned some of the tribal participation out of the 12 in Riverside. I'm curious, does that include the mountain tribes, Kuya, Santa Rosa, Saboba, and those?
It has not yet. So far, the ones who have responded are the Cabazon tribe and the Four Winds.
And have you reached out to everyone?
I have, although I don't have contacts for a couple of those that you mentioned, the Santa Rosa.
Please see me after.
I
and
would
I'll take
love
care
to.
of that.
Absolutely.
And then, so since the Riverside County is so big, are you supporting efforts that aren't started by the Riverside County effort,
Yes.
like the Anza Valley Co-op that's
Absolutely.
building out fiber in the mountain regions?
Yes,
and stuff like
absolutely.
that?
The one thing we don't want to do is we don't want to get in the way of anything else that's going on. And if a city of Coachella is building out some fiber in their downtown area, and would just go for it, whatever you
Are you
want to do.
helping them financially? Are you removing roadblocks? What are you
We
doing?
can't. We will remove.
assistance?
We'll help out in any way as far as permitting or anything that from the county government is concerned. We have no funds for it, though, unfortunately.
Okay. Are you trying to? Well, I guess the last question then is are you providing incentives for at least middle mile connectivity to those tribal regions? Because the biggest problem in Indian country is we don't have any backhaul to the rest of the world. So we don't have
Right.
access to fiber to backhaul. I mean, we can build our own networks and they look really cool and
Right.
they're awesome, they're innovative.
Yeah.
But if we can't get back to the world, then we can't connect. So if there's some incentive that Riverside County could do, I would suggest that would be a great way to.
It's a good idea, yeah.
Promote.
Yeah. And when we develop, once we actually decide on, and select the partners who are going to build this out, we'll have a master agreement, and then we will want to spell that sort of thing out in the agreement, so that we make sure that everyone is served, and it isn't, like I say, it isn't going just toward the wealthier communities, that we cover everybody, and the 12 tribal communities we have are certainly included in that.
Great. And I'm a resident of Riverside County. I live in Owanga. So.
Oh, perfect. All right. Ace.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Good morning, Paul Goodman with the Green Lining Institute. In California, we have a supplier diversity program where utilities, including telecommunications utilities, track and then report their spend with diverse companies, so third party, whether they're companies owned by people of color, LGBT, veterans, and women, and then they report those numbers every year. I'm wondering if any of your projects have involved supplier diversity tracking and whether you've seen success with that.
Yeah, hi.
Good morning. Matt Gress with Arizona Corporation Commissioner Andy Tobin's office. We've been very interested in the E-rate program, especially the enhanced E-rate match for special construction. And the commission in March changed their rules for the Arizona Universal Service Fund that would allow school districts and libraries all across Arizona to access those funds to help provide state match. And I think the governor's included $5 million in his budget proposal. So we're expecting, with $8 million from the Corporation Commission and $5 million from the governor's office, that could bring in, based on the discount rate, between $80 and $100 million for special construction. And we're trying to get the word out about that we're only doing this for 2 years because that's what we have guaranteed from the FCC. But I was curious, Kimball, about that process, and to what extent did you work with the carriers? How should school districts and libraries think about bringing in broadband in a more holistic approach here to say, not only are they coming in and we're being the anchor institution, but how do we work with other community partners, hospitals, first responders, municipalities, et cetera?
That was the hardest part, and I think that took the most time, was to get us out of our silos. Because even in education, I'm Bureau of Indian Education, and I hope that your state project is going to include those for eligibility. But then we had the public schools, and then we had the libraries, and then we have health. And in our tribal communities, they're very long-standing institutions that have their sources of funding and their own accountability, and they might be next to each other, but they don't talk to each other across the street. So how to convince them to come together and then to share costs and for us make a 20-year commitment to work together was it took 18 months to get to where we are right now. So I started with the 2 libraries and their internal chains of command going up there in the tribes. And one of them had me working just with the education director first in the library. One of them had me working with the librarian, the IT person. Not all the tribes even have IT. Another one had an investment committee. Some of them had fiber advisors that had good advice or bad advice. So I met with them time and time again, and I got vertical levels of support. And the numbers just kept growing. And I said the pitch on how E-rate worked, which is very complicated, especially with fiber construction, and then how it works within their funding streams, and what the expectation would be for participation and deployment. So I think that on the human side, you need to plan, and you just need to keep talking, and especially for people who aren't broadband people, they only took away like 10%, especially tribal leadership, every time I talked to them. So I just did it again and again and again and again, and now I'm happy to say, though, that if I can't make it, I remember I was stuck in an airport, Delta's, whatever that, their computers went down. I don't know if you guys remember that. Some of you were probably stuck in similar airports. And we had the Fifer special construction team from E-rate and some other people coming nationally to visit us. So I was stuck in the airport, and our librarians, got up and just stepped up and went and took that crew and toured them around our pueblos. And they could say what I knew about the project because we had done so many times, and it transferred to be their project, and they owned it, and they were willing to step up and work with their networks. And so it really became a community effort. And with the carriers, I always try to have good relationships with all potential service providers and hear what they have to say and look for creative solutions. And when it was the construction company that was in the middle of it and put the pieces together, I thought that was interesting. And they're the ones that reached out and explored different companies and came back, and it ended up being, in the back of the room, a Juniper BTI solution. And those teams were and then Zayo, they were really put in an extra effort to come out to our communities and see what was going on and have them on premise and make that extra effort, and going back and forth and to design it was a really positive relationship with the vendors.
Thank you for such an excellent panel. Tim Herwig, I'm with the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. We're one of the federal bank regulatory agencies, so we supervise banks with national or federal charters, so everything from Chase or Citi down to First Federal Savings Loan of Albert Lea, Minnesota, where I grew up. So I was wondering if any banks participated in the financing of any of the projects you've been talking about, either banks that were depositories for the municipality and may have participated in a bond, or banks that were financing construction loans for the city or the contractors who were doing the construction work. And you can go ahead and name the bank. It's totally okay. But I want to take notes, so I'm going to go back and sit down.
We did originally. We did a revenue bond that was based on the revenue from the electric side. So that's, as Don mentions, there's advantages of having an electric city so that we could actually leverage that. We got in the electric business in the 1900s, and we got in the broadband business in the 2000s. And we just leveraged the revenue from the electric side to actually build the system. And yes, we did go out and get bonds for that. I wasn't directly involved in the bonding. I believe it was Zion Bank that we did the bonds from then. We use KeyBank now, I believe. But we're not doing any bonding for the new fiber project. It will all be installed based entirely on the revenue that is coming in from the hybrid fiber coax system. So our current customers are actually paying for the fiber conversion. It'll be done in about 3 more years.
Do you have a question? I want to make a comment to close, but if you have a question.
Yeah, I just have a quick question because we're out of time, but I really wanted to just ask people who are from cities, if I talk to cities that are thinking about doing what Mesa did, for instance, a lot of times Public Works will come back and say, we don't do that. So I'm curious if there's any comment on how to respond and get around that.
Well, I will say that that's probably true. And particularly, one of the things we were interested in using was all our traffic signals are connected with conduit and fiber. We have a smart traffic system. We have a large traffic management center here in Mesa that they run all our signals from. And initially, our transportation folks were kind of like, yeah, we don't really want you doing that. I will tell you that between our IT folks and my right-of-way management staff, they spend a lot of time working with the different departments and ensuring them of how things would work and involving them. And I will just kind of reiterate a little bit the communication, continuing to talk to people over and over, and then they start to see some benefits for themselves, particularly when we could work with the private companies and do some infill pieces that got some of their network more complete. So there's something in it for them, and it was just really, it was a matter of, I think, communication, and we got everybody on board.
For us, it was really a situation because the electric department didn't want to be in the broadband business. And so we got a little bit of that, well, we don't do that. But when you have a mayor and city council and a city manager all firmly behind you, all of a sudden they do that.
And a way to close that loop, you make it a strategic goal, which I represent, and then now you create a golden thread between all the departments, and that's what happened for us. They all have to work together to meet that goal because we are measuring them with outcomes. Do you mind if I just make a quick comment? Okay. I just want to, we talk about successes here, and Commissioner Clyburn I want to highlight something. She said it fairly quick, but this whole removing the market entry for broadband deployers, for state and local, I'll come out of my skin on that topic because local control is probably one of the most important things because we're the closest. We live in these cities, we live in these towns. And I want to point out something, and I want to make sure we're all really clear when we leave today. My community doesn't have the luxury like Mesa does, where forward thinking, how many years ago, putting 12 conduits, which is probably more than a telecom would ever put in, but that's great. But for us, we wrote in 2003 a plan to do fiber in our city. We just never put which streets we wanted it on. We finally got it done, and then let me kind of stop right there. In our state, it is against the law, state law, for municipals to go into broadband unless your citizens overturn that law. And so in our state, almost every county and every city has overturned it, which that shows how effective our state legislator is. But the thing is every city and town and county that overturned it was well over 70 to 75% supporting municipal broadband. What does that tell you as your community? It tells you that they're fed up with something. And what we found in the communities in the state of Colorado is, and I'm going to repeat some of the things that Commissioner Clyburn has said, it needs to be affordable, has to have capacity, more than a meg would be nice, and it needs to be reliable. I didn't hear the word reliable, and that's huge for me because in my community, we have the wealthiest zip code, and they all work from home. Well, guess what if you don't have internet? My citizens flip. I get phone calls on that. So let's think about those things. And when we talk about barriers that states and cities create, they're not barriers. I think it's just we need to be thoughtful in our deployment and be balanced. And there is a way to overcome that. Like we promised our industry in our city that we'll respond within 14 days, calendar days, on any of your permits. But in return, we expect you to work with us on our needs. And part of it that we've done recently that's, let's be honest, it pissed off the industry, was we wanted a shadow conduit so we can catch up with cities like Mesa. And the shadow conduit was at our expense, the incremental costs associated to match our fiber plan, to let us, not necessarily get into municipal broadband, but let us grow technology, better serve our citizens, improve the traffic flow, and do everything. So when Commissioner Clyburn and the FCC says, remove barriers, that tells me you're handcuffing me where I can't negotiate these improvements to my community or help my schools. I mean, these are things we got to think through. So for those that work within government or represent government, I mean, we need to be a balanced approach. We need to work with them, but we also need to make sure the industry works with us. And so it's funny when I asked, and I'll throw the name out, Comcast, because they're already mad at me as it is. I said, you need to work with us. Our school districts and everyone work. We throw in the shadow conduit. We'll pay out of our own penny. But we just need to ask if you would just do it while you tear up our streets, because it gets back to we want to dig once, and that's it. We don't have money for our streets. We don't have the money to tear it up. And every time we put a new street down, there's an 18-inch cut right down the middle of it. And so, just kind of think about those things. So I wanted to Sorry, get on my box.
No, that's
That's the
all right.
politician part getting into
Can I
me.
add to that? I know, we're out
See,
of time.
now I should have started with this.
No, I was also going to add something.
All right, sorry.
So one of the things I know that I work with in a lot of cities we're working with at the moment is encouraging them as part of their master plan, their annual plan, to put in a telecommunications section. And that way, every year it comes up and it's expected to come up. It's not something new, and that's really good. Last thing, a shout out to Tim. He's been very helpful on a number of phone calls. I've involved him working with communities in Maine and North Carolina and others, and very helpful. Thanks everybody for the panel, and appreciate it. Round of applause.